Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akari-Duluale, the headlines. Ukrainian artillery strikes headquarters of Russia's shadowy Wagner military group of mercenaries in eastern Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin boasts of his country's weapons prowess, says Moscow is ready to share it with allies. And Donetsk court charges Britons, Swede and Croat as mercenaries. 3 face the death penalty. We begin this morning with news that the Ukrainian artillery has struck a headquarters of Russia's shadowy Wagner paramilitary group of mercenaries in eastern Ukraine. According to reports, the extent of damage to the military base of the group, which has been linked to war crimes, is not clear. Luhansk governor claims its secret location was revealed after a Russian journalist shared its address. Last week, pro-Kremlin correspondent Sergei Shrader posted a photo on Telegram of the base with its apparent address. The image shared on the social media site, but since deleted, shows 5 people in military uniform with a street sign in Popasny near Luhansk visible in the top left corner. The Wagner group was deployed to Crimea and Ukraine's Donbas region in 2014 when Kremlin-backed forces ousted Ukrainian troops from areas they later declared to be part of Russia. And Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu held a telephone conversation with the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres yesterday regarding safety at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russia, which controls the plant, has accused Ukraine of shelling it, while Ukraine and its Western backers insist the Russians are attacking territory they themselves hold. Located in the city of Energoda in southern Ukraine, the Zaporizhzhia facility is the largest one in Europe. It has been under control, that's Russian control, since the beginning of Moscow's military operation in Ukraine, but has since been subjected to a series of attacks in recent weeks. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the world will lose to terrorism and give in to nuclear blackmail if it takes no action to prevent an accident at the Zaporizhzhia power station. Russia took over the station soon after invading Ukraine in February in what Moscow has been calling a special military operation. Ukraine and Russia, as we've been reporting, have accused each other of being behind shelling incidents at the station.
Russia does not stop its blackmail actions at Separatist nuclear power plant and around it. Provocative shelling of the nuclear power plant territory continues. Under cover of the station, the occupiers are shelling nearby towns and communities. The Russian military hides ammunition and equipment right in this station's facilities. The station is de facto mined. All this clearly shows that Russia is rejecting the security demands of the European Union countries and 15 other countries, 42 in total, that called on Russia to withdraw its troops from the station. In particular, these are Turkey, Georgia, Great Britain, Korea, Japan, Australia, Canada, and the United States of America. If a terrorist state allows itself to completely ignore the international community's demand, and furthermore, on such a sensitive topic, this clearly indicates the need for immediate action. Any radiation incident at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant can be a blow to the countries of the European Union, Turkey, Georgia, and the countries from more distant regions. Everything depends only on the direction and strength of the wind. If Russia's actions lead to a catastrophe, the consequences may hit those who yet remain silent.
And away from the Zaporizhzhia power station, a Russian-backed separatist court in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk has charged 5 foreign nationals captured fighting with Ukrainian forces with being mercenaries, saying 3 of them could face the death penalty. According to Russian state-owned news agencies, the foreign nationals who were captured in and around the port city of Mariupol face a possible death sentence under the laws of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. It cited the judge as saying that the trial would resume in early October.
I was detained in Ukraine by the Russian Federation, nowhere near the DPR. The vehicle together, which I was driving, we drove up to a Russian checkpoint where we were taken out of the vehicle. We had weapons pointed at our heads and we were detained by the Russian soldiers.
And what was said in that contract?
It stated that we were civilian workers who were working to evacuate civilians from Ukraine. It stated our names, our passport numbers, and what we were allowed to do and where we were cleared into.
Meanwhile, 5 men, including 3 from Britain, have denied being mercenaries fighting with Ukrainian forces against Russia in a Russian court. John Hardin, Dylan Healy, and Andrew Hill appeared in court in the Donetsk People's Republic, as we've just been reporting. The court recently sentenced 2 British men and a Moroccan to death. The sentences have not yet been carried out. The 5 men who appeared were led into court in a breakaway region of Ukraine, handcuffed and with black bags over their heads. Russian Defense Ministry says a Royal Air Force spy plane violated Russian airspace in the Barents Sea near Murmansk. A MiG-31 interceptor was dispatched to escort the RC-135 surveillance jet from the vicinity of Cape Swatonorsk, near the major bases of the Russian Navy's Northern Fleet. The MiG-31 interceptor on duty with the Border Air Patrol identified the aircraft and compelled it to stop its violation of Russian airspace. The military said in a statement that Moscow identified the location of the incident, a cape on the Kola Peninsula east of Murmansk in western Russia. While the Defense Ministry of Russia offered no further details about the incident, flight radar showed a Royal Air Force RC-135 flying off the coast of Murmansk earlier. And Russian President Vladimir Putin says that Moscow values its ties with countries in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, and was ready to offer them modern weapons. Mr. Putin used a speech at an arms show near Moscow to boast of Russia's advanced weapons capabilities and declare its willingness to share technology with like-minded countries. He was speaking nearly 6 months after Russia sent its troops into Ukraine, where reports say they have suffered setbacks and some losses.
Russia sincerely cherishes historically strong, friendly, truly trusting ties with the states of Latin America, Asia, and Africa. It is ready to offer its allies and partners the most modern types of weapons, from small arms to armored vehicles and artillery, combat aviation, and unmanned aerial vehicles. We intend to actively develop cooperative ties to create new models of weapons and equipment, to work together on fair and equal terms.
We're learning that New Zealand has announced the deployment of 120 additional Defense Force personnel to the United Kingdom to train Ukrainian warfighters for their ongoing conflict with Russia. The project includes more than 40 million New Zealand dollars in financial aid, as well as 850 personnel. It follows the initial assignment of 30 New Zealand Defense Force troops in May to provide artillery training to Ukrainian forces. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the country has been clear that it will continue to answer the call of Ukraine for practical support as it defends its homeland and peoples against Russia's invasion. Let's talk to Vladimir Dubovik, who is Associate Professor, Department of International Relations, Mechnikov National University. He joins us virtually from Odessa. Thank you very much. Welcome to the program this morning.
Good morning, sir. Good to be here again.
Let's start off from what we are hearing this morning. First, the very last story: New Zealand sending additional troops to train Ukrainian fighters in the UK. Of course, the United Kingdom has been training Ukrainian fighters for quite a bit. But are you worried that with the political situation in Britain itself, there might be either a slowdown or an adjustment in this very robust support for Ukraine as it prepares to change its prime minister?
No, sir. Sure, I don't. I see a lot of consensus in Great Britain about helping Ukraine. It runs across political spectrum. Definitely anyone who has a chance of becoming a new leader of Conservative for Prime Minister, strong supporter of this course, this policy of Ukraine, be it Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. They both have said and stated many times that they're not going to change. If anything, they're going to double down on supporting Ukraine. And Rishi Sunak said his first visit would be, a foreign visit would be to Ukraine. And Liz Truss is well known as a public face, as a foreign minister, obviously a foreign secretary, of supporting Ukraine. So yes, and also many parties in England, in UK rather, in Great Britain, they are also supporting Ukraine. It's just not just conservatives, obviously. So yes, and public is very supportive. I mean, the public is extremely antagonistic towards Russian aggression in Great Britain. So no, don't worry. And I think for Ukrainian troops to train in Great Britain, there are several benefits. One is that they can train away from a country which is in war, so in more or less, safe and peaceful and quiet circumstances and conditions. And second, they can learn how to better use the equipment, the weapons that have been given by Western allies to Ukraine. And that's better to be done also in Great Britain. And Ukrainian troops are very knowledgeable now already in terms of how to fight Russian troops, but sometimes they need quiet time to be alone or be trained to use equipment, the weapons being provided now by a number of countries to Ukraine. So that's how I see this training, because otherwise you would assume that New Zealand armed troops are better prepared than Ukrainian armed troops to fight Russians, and that's not the case. But sometimes, yes, Ukrainian military needs time away and to learn more about the weapons that have been supplied.
Let's talk about the situation with those who have been captured and are being talked about as mercenaries fighting on the Ukrainian side. As we've been reporting before now, there had been several other people who had been arrested and who had been tried. In fact, I think there were 3 of them, 2 Brits and a Moroccan, who were sentenced to death. They haven't been killed yet, but again now an additional about 5 of them have now been arrested. Again, 3 Britons, and we were just talking about British support, 3 Britons, a Croat and a Swede. Again, does this say something perhaps about the method being used to use these mercenaries? That is, if Ukraine is indeed using mercenaries to prosecute this war against Russia.
Well, I mean, and the definition of mercenary is quite murky. I mean, it's vague. Many of those people come to Ukraine, and some of them take up Ukrainian citizenship to fight in Ukrainian military and become regular soldiers. Some are signing contracts, indeed, with Ukrainian military. So whether they're mercenaries or not, it's up for the lawyers, to international law experts to decide. Yes, they've been captured, of course, because they come in quite large numbers. They become part of the International Legion or International Brigade fighting for Ukraine. But there are also, of course, there are many foreigners fighting on the other side. If they would be tried, well, those trials, of course, are not recognized, neither by Ukraine nor by international community. Outside of Russia or so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, no one recognizes those trials. The similar thing would happen if Russia goes ahead with trying the defenders of Azovstal in Mariupol in some kind of tribunal, a public tribunal, which would remind us of the times of 1937, 38, when the Stalin organized similar trials, when there was no trial, or just a public spectacle. So if they would actually persecute or kill those people, execute them, I don't know. They might, but the usual modus operandi, at least for Russia, is to keep them as some kind of a bargain material that they can exchange for someone they want to get out from the West. Definitely Russia is doing this, as you can see now with a basketball WNBA player, Griner, and some others. They want some people out of American jail, so Western jail, so to speak, and they're using these people as bargain material and as hostages in some ways. And probably the similar thing would be done to those military people who are now in a so-called Donetsk or Luhansk People's Republic's captivity.
But then, of course, Ukraine itself has hit the Wagner group, because in your answer there, you mentioned the fact that there are quite a number of people fighting for the other side. Now, in the case of the Wagner group, what we know about them, quite a secretive group, but they are mostly Russians, but they are Russian mercenaries because they fought in Mali here in Africa and several other places. They fought in Syria and so on. And now Ukraine's forces launched attack on one of their headquarters identified in eastern Ukraine. So is this some kind of tit for tat? You arrest those fighting for us, we go after you as well?
Maybe in a way, but not really. Major thing here is that the Wagner now is a part of Russian regular military, basically. Earlier in the war, the Wagner was staying out and indeed continuing its missions, like you said, in Mali or Sub-Saharan Africa or in Central African Republic, where they, by the way, committed and still committing numerous war crimes, by the way. So, but then since Russia was lacking fresh reserves to put on Ukrainian front, the Wagner was invited as one of their detachments, really units of Russian army. And that's how they're fighting, and that's how Ukrainians hit them as one of the units of Russian army. So there was no special singling out of Wagner. Okay, let's attack Wagner. They're fighting in this particular line of the front, and that's who Ukrainians have against them, and that's why Ukrainian military hit them. But yes, there's not much of a movement back and forth, not much of a kinetic nature of warfare in the recent weeks or months even. On the Ukrainian front, which is a long front. I can remind you, it's about 2,500 kilometers front line between Ukraine and Russia right now. So Russia is not really advancing in Donbass. They're stalled there. Ukrainians are on the verge of advancing in the south, maybe in direction of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, but not advancing quickly as well, maybe taking some small takes, incremental takes, small villages here and there. So it's not a stalemate as such. It's not a situation where you have an impasse, neither side can advance, but it's close to that. I mean, because both sides been actually quite exhausted in terms of human resources and in terms of weapons and in terms of operational capabilities that they have. So it's an interesting moment there for this war. I mean, obviously, still people are dying, and we are seeing here in Ukraine, it's a very public war here in Ukraine. We're seeing, photos of people dying every day. And I personally know already people who lost someone in their families fighting at the war. So, but still, the intensity of the fighting is nowhere near like it was, say, 2 months ago in Donbass, for instance.
Let me ask you, as I did the last time that I spoke to you, and I'm going to use the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant issue as a peg to ask about your personal safety. I don't know, I'm not exactly sure how far, but I'm certain that if something were to happen at that nuclear power plant, you and where you are would be one of the more immediate impact areas of that. How is it in Odessa? We know that the port there is being used under the United Nations grain deal, so the port area would probably be safe. But in Odessa itself, what's the situation, especially given what I just mentioned about that plant?
Right. So two things. So Odessa, the grain deal is actually working. That's true. You're right, and that's a good sign. I mean, it's a good sign definitely for Ukrainian economy because we're finally carrying out some foodstuffs like grain and corn and fertilizers and stuff like that. It's a good thing that people around the world are getting this long delayed and long needed and much needed supply. And it's probably a good thing because it shows that if not directly, but via intermediary, Ukraine and Russia can actually talk. There might be a dialogue. So it could be a good lesson or practice for the future peace negotiations. In terms of Zaporizhia nuclear power station, it's the biggest one in Europe. So obviously, if something goes wrong there, and they are on the verge of something going wrong, there will be a terrible problem, not just for Ukraine, but also for Russia, because you know, there are many regions within Russia that are closer geographically to it than, let's say, Odessa or Western Ukraine, even more so, even further away. It depends on what kind of. Well, first of all, let's hope there is no disaster. There's no leakage of you know, radioactive material in the air and water. In the land, in the soil, but if that happens, then depends on what kind of a disaster, what kind of incident, accident, and where the wind is blowing. We can remember that Chernobyl in 1986, you know, the people felt increased radioactivity levels as far as Western Europe. So Zaporizhia is also has the potential of exploding like this, obviously. So we were worried, but people around Ukraine should be worried as well. People in Russia should be worried as well. And I think there is now time for Russian military to recognize the fact that major incidents or accident there at the power station, atomic power station, nuclear power station, would not be in their interest. That would impact a lot of Russian troops and a lot of Russian civilians across the border as well, if the wind blows, you know, to the east from the station. So there is time now to demilitarize Zaporizhia nuclear power station and let people who work there work in peaceful conditions, because it's Ukrainian personnel, but it's basically working under barrels of Russian guns for a long time now, and it's a stressful situation.
Indeed. Vladimir Dubovic, thank you for your time and for your perspective this morning. Please continue to stay safe out there. It's been a pleasure speaking with you this morning.
As well.
When we return, first ship bound for Africa leaves Ukrainian port with grain. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying with us. Welcome back. The Ukrainian military has not been able to pull off its promised counteroffensive, as Russian forces are now likely to take over the whole of Ukraine's Black Sea coast. That's according to Colonel Douglas McGregor, a former advisor to the Secretary of Defense in the Trump administration. Colonel McGregor dismissed as, quote, utterly nonsensical reports in some U.S. media outlets that the Russian military has lost some 80,000 personnel in Ukraine so far. According to the decorated Gulf War veteran, quote, more accurate numbers are probably 13 to 15,000 dead on the Russian side, with Ukrainian forces having lost 60 to 80,000. Commenting on these reports in late July, the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, had described the alleged Russian casualty figures as fake. He also lamented that even established media outlets are publishing misleading reports these days. The ship Brave Commander has left the Ukrainian port of Providenie carrying the first cargo of food supply bound for Africa from Ukraine since Russia's invasion, and that's according to Refinitiv Icon data. Earlier, a joint coordination center set up by Russia, Turkey, Ukraine, and the United Nations said it had approved the ship's departure. Turkey's defense ministry said a total of 5 ships left Ukrainian ports carrying corn and wheat. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said while there was a room for a European-level debate on banning Russian tourists, it was important not to make life harder for Kremlin opponents to flee Russia. Several European countries, including Finland's Sanna Marin, who was also at the meeting, have called for Russian troops to be banned from the EU to ensure that they too pay a penalty for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The prime ministers of Finland and Denmark said that a visa ban should also be discussed.
They fled to. It was an important decision of all of us that we imposed sanctions on those who are responsible for the war, and a lot of oligarchs and those who are financially and economically profiting from this Putin regime. And we will continue to do so. But I think this is not the war of the Russian people, it is Putin's war, and we have to be very clear on that topic. I think there is room for maneuver in different countries, yes, if this is the question. as it is always the case. And it's also as acceptable that we start a debate on the European level on what to do. What is important for us is that we also understand that there are a lot of people fleeing from Russia because they are disagreeing with the Russian regime. And they've fled to many countries in Europe. They fled to many countries all around Russia. And all the decisions we take should not make it more complicated for them to go for freedom and to leave the country for getting away from the leadership and the dictatorship in Russia.
Ordinary Russian people didn't start the war, but at the same time we have to realize that they are supporting the war. I think it's not right that Russian citizens can travel, enter Europe, Schengen area, be tourists, see the sightseeings while Russia is killing people in Ukraine. It's wrong. And we need to discuss it in European Council. We need to discuss it in the Schengen area, what to do with the issue. Of course, it's not black and white issue. There is also different colors of gray in there. There are also many people in Russia that are against the war, that are actually under threat within Russia. So, of course, there are different colors also the situation. But I think, in general, I understand very good about the frustration.
It's understandable why some Europeans and maybe especially some Ukrainians find it a bit strange that Russia has attacked a European country. There's a war in Europe, and at the same time we are receiving tourists from the same country that has attacked another country. So I think it is an important discussion.
Let's talk now to Ambrose Igboke, Chairman, Guild of Public Affairs Analysts, who joins us from Enugu, the capital of Enugu State. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Laddie, for having me this morning.
Yeah, let's start off with I don't know if you want to call it cherry news. I'll ask you, though. The first ship bound for Africa with grain has now left Ukraine, is on its way to Turkey for inspection, and then thereafter, if all goes well, it should be on the way to Africa. Good news?
Well, temporarily, we may see it as good news, but I am ashamed as an African to say that we are still dependent on grains and food supply from Ukraine for the African continent. African continent has a lot of agrarian land. African continent is a continent full of natural resources. Our soil can produce anything, any agricultural produce under the sun. But we still rely in the 21st century with all the technologies available that we can procure easily. We still rely on Ukraine for food supply. And then it is also a shame on Africa that in a time of war, that Ukraine is in war, Africa is not at war. But Ukraine is at war, and Ukraine is the one feeding us with their grains. I think this is the time to, re-strategize. This is the time to rethink our Africanness, that as a continent, we don't have food sufficiency. It should be the other way around. We should be the people sending foodstuff as relief materials to Ukrainians, and not the other way around. And Ukrainian is giving us food when they are in times of war. So it is cherry news that it may bring down the prices of wheat and prices of grain in the market in Africa. But it's also a shame that Africa is actually happy that Ukraine is feeding it, even though Ukraine is at war. So it is time for sober reflection. I don't think it's time for any sort of cherry news here.
For the first time, and maybe not for the first time, let me correct myself, there's been a very senior government official who said that some of the information that has seeped out about what is going on in Ukraine itself, both in terms of casualty figures and how the war is progressing, isn't entirely correct, and that sometimes the mainstream media itself has been sucked into this quote-unquote deception. This is a senior official of the United States under the Trump administration who is saying that the casualty figures of Russians in this war is not anywhere near as high as has been portrayed, and that secondly, Ukraine has not been able to mount the promised counteroffensive that it wanted to in the south, and that Russia, in fact, may soon be in control of the entire Black Sea coast. Is this more propaganda, do you think, or is this a more sober assessment of the situation on ground, devoid of all the politicking and geopolitical strategizing?
Well, I'm a scholar in communication, mass communication. And if you have studied mass communication, you will understand the history of the control of news from the behemoth of the Western media. And over the years, we know that the Western, in fact, Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State in the United States in the 60s, said that, give me the media instead of, and I will defeat the whole world instead of an army. So they know the power of communication. And the study that was commissioned in the 80s talked about the New World Information Communication Order. And that brought out about how information flows from the West to the third world countries. And all the information that flows from there is controlled by the media in the first world countries, in the advanced nations. And they own all the agencies, for example, the Reuters, the Associated Press, the AP, the AFP in France, and other big corporations that deal with news. They have satellites in space. So what they do is that they sell what they call agenda setting theory in mass communication, where they set the agenda for the tone of discussion, they slant the news to suit whatever perspectives they want. And that has been the culture of news all over. Now, when America, for example, invades a country, it is not called, the name of the president is not called, it's not called a Reagan war. It is not called a Bush war. It is that America is fighting for the world, America is fighting for democracy. Now, Putin is doing the same thing America did, and they call it Putin's war. It's no more Russian war. So these narratives have been controlled over the years. And unlike the media in Nigeria that try to balance stories while because of the broadcast code here, in the United States, it's not like that. The media in the United States is highly partisan. For example, the Fox News, the ABC, the CNN, they all have political affiliation. The Fox News, they don't even care. They don't even bother to hide it. They are pro this or anti that. And we can see all that playing out. So when it comes to this war, the European media and the American media will do anything possible to set the propaganda that the war is in favor of Ukraine and that to tarnish the image of Russia. They will do as much as possible not to bring the perfect picture up here. The same thing, Russia is doing the same thing. The TASS, which is the news agency in Russia, is also selling dummies to the Russians, painting the war as if their brothers the Russian-speaking brothers in Ukraine are being persecuted, and they were going there to, rescue them from the clutches of persecution by the Ukrainians. So on both sides, there are propaganda, and that is what war propaganda does. It does not, say the truth about realities on ground. So unless there are independent facts, independent finding alternatives, we will not actually know the truth in the Russia-Ukraine war through the media.
All right, then. Let me also ask you about something that could affect far more than either Russia or Ukraine, and that's this nuclear power plant issue and the accusations and counter-accusations. Again, that's something over which, as at now, we do not know the exact truth of what is going on and who is doing what. But then, if there is a leak or radioactive material gets out of that power plant, it will not only be Russians or Ukrainians who will suffer. Many people point fingers back at 1986 and the Chernobyl disaster, incidentally in the same Ukraine, which up till now, certain areas are unlivable because of that disaster. Do you worry about this situation? And if you do, what exactly do you think should be done to safeguard that plant?
Well, first of all, the introduction or the invention of a nuclear weapon in the world, which was an emanation of aftermath of the Second World War, is something that every human being should be worried about. I mean, a weapon that annihilates the whole world and the press of a button is not what any human being will be comfortable with. But we have that evil with us. We have the menace with us, and it is here to stay. And more countries are acquiring nuclear weapons. Now, some nuclear facilities are not for only weapon warfare, or they are not only for weapons. They're also for electricity generation. And so, some countries have what we call peaceful nuclear, rich in uranium, and they try to use it for electricity and not for war. What we have in Ukraine right now is a very, very delicate matter. Well, I don't think we should worry too much, because when anything happens to that nuclear power plant, anything happens to it, Russia will be firstly affected before anybody. Russia and other neighbors around Ukraine will be the first to be affected. So Russia is not foolish. Russia will do anything to safeguard that plant, and so also the rest of Europe. Because once anything happens there, the effects of the radiation will go beyond Ukraine, and it will, the first set of people it will affect is the neighbors. And Russia is a neighbor to Ukraine. So both sides will do anything to safeguard that facility. And I don't think the rest of the world should worry, because I'm sure that both sides will make sure that nothing happens to it. Because if something happens to it, there will be the first casualty and not the rest of the world.
Indeed. Ambrose Igboke, thank you so much for your perspective this morning. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Laddie.
Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre says the country is delivering all the gas it can to Germany, and any further boost would depend on making new discoveries. Norway, Western Europe's largest petroleum producer, this year boosted its gas exports to take advantage of record prices and help Europe replace some of the volumes lost when Russia curbed supplies. He adds that any further increase would depend on finding and developing additional resources. In the meantime, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz welcomed Norway's efforts.
So what we have done in Norway is to work with the companies operating on the Norwegian shelf to get them to maximize within the opportunities they have for secure production, to maximize that production. In addition, LNG has come on the market from the northernmost part of Norway after 1 year of interruption. It came on the market in May, and I think Germany has been the destination for much of that. So in total, we have been increasing our gas exports compared to what we had at the outset with up to close to 10%, which is really maximum. So we will do whatever we can with the companies to maintain a high level. And if that is to increase, it will depend on us finding more gas.
Tusen takk for oppmøtet.
Meanwhile, German households will have to pay hundreds of pounds more a year for gas under a levy to help energy companies cover the cost of replacing Russian supplies. Before the Ukraine war, Germany imported more than half its gas from Russia. Germany already has some of the highest household gas bills in Europe. The government said the move was necessary to prevent the collapse of the German energy market. Ministers have promised the levy, which will be imposed from the 1st of October and remain in place until April 2024, will be accompanied by additional support for households. Gas prices have soared since the invasion of Ukraine, as Western countries imposed sanctions and pledged to phase out Russian imports. And staying in Germany, the Economy and Climate Action Minister Robert Habeck threw out the country's entire business model, saying it relied on cheap energy imports from Russia that will never return. The Vice-Chancellor's comments came during his announcement of a special tax, which have been reporting on natural gas, intended to redistribute the impact of energy shortages between companies and the general population. Speaking at a news conference in Berlin, Robert Habeck says Germany developed a business model that was largely based on dependence on cheap Russian gas, adding that the model has failed now and is not coming back. Coming up after the break, there's little respite for doctors in the Donetsk region as medics battle to save lives on Ukraine's eastern front lines. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. And as always at this time, Laddie Williams joins us from our business desk.
Good morning.
Morning to you, Laddie.
Good morning.
Natural gas prices are extending their gains. Of course, I just reported that Robert Habeck says that the issue of cheap natural gas is gone and it's not coming back.
It's over.
That's from the German perspective. And because of that, there's a new gas levy. Right. Let's start off with the gas prices, shall we, and the extension of gains.
Yeah, so we're seeing oil prices, dump at this time, but we're seeing gas prices rise, and obviously we're seeing it's all because of demand. We're seeing demand in coming from Europe at this time because it's a scorching summer right now, and they need, gas, for cooling. Even though they also need gas for winter.
For winter, which
so
is
it's
coming.
and that's coming, and they can already feel the pinch, at this time, with the hot, dry weather, and that's impacting prices now. We're seeing prices, rise for natural gas. This morning was trading about $8.89, was up about 1.84%, and obviously that's going to translate into higher prices for the energy companies that are bringing in all of that gas. So at the end of the day, this is also sparking recession fears, in Europe, because if they cannot get the gas right, that's going to impact, output, for Europe. And we're seeing them already try to find ways, to reduce the impact of this curbed gas we're getting from Russia. They're getting about 20%. At the same time, the heat level is drying up their rivers. So that's also impacting the energy commodities that's supposed to be transported. So there's a double whammy they're feeling at this point in Europe. And at the end of the day, we're seeing them.
Some of that, they're talking about the levy, right?
Exactly. That's like €2, about €2.40. That's going to be added for energy cost in Europe, and obviously that's going to be passed on to the consumers, which in turn is going to stoke inflation even more, because with rising energy prices, it's going to trickle down into...
We've seen that already in Britain.
Exactly. We've seen that happen already. So that whole cost of living crisis we're seeing in UK, we're also going to see that in Europe because of these energy prices. And obviously, passing on to the consumers is the next phase, even though, you don't want to pass on all of that. The government
is talking about helping.
Yeah, they're talking about also helping. So it's a tough place. It's a tough decision they have to make, because they don't want that gas market to collapse. So they have to put that levy on, and hopefully they might also come up with some plan, for consumers to help them,
be able to cushion it. Again,
and
the UK being the prime example.
Hopefully they don't bring some kind of help that also stokes inflation too. So
that's it. You're right. It's a double whammy here. But on the other side, the Russians, whose curbed supplies have created this situation, seem to have moved on elsewhere.
Yeah.
Their supplies to other countries are now increasing.
Yeah.
Friendly countries, I want to assume.
Friendly.
One of which is Brazil.
Yeah. So we've seen Russia talk about moving their business, away from unfriendly nations to friendly nations, and one of that is the BRICS, which is made up of Brazil, Russia, Iran, China, and South Africa. So Brazil, which is, one of the top buyers of their products, in that list, we've seen their exports to Brazil actually double. It doubled from about $2.5 billion to about $6 or $5 billion in 2022, talking about 2021. And we've also seen, Brazil's exports to Russia lower, though, about $800 million in 2021. That has increased to about $1 billion in 2022. But we see, Russia is getting the best, out of that deal. You're talking about Russia, Brazil.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's their plan. They're moving away from, Europe and other countries that are termed unfriendly. They're moving away, trying to get their business elsewhere. But at the same time, analysts are saying that how long can they keep this up? Because when you're not able to sell even to the friendly nations at some point, because they might also get secondary sanctions if they continue selling to you. So it's a lot they have to, in the long run. Analysts are still seeing it as quite bleak, for Russia, because when you see countries moving away from your products, if that continues, at some point, even the friendly nations might become unfriendly.
Friendly, and not because they want to.
Not because they want to. They have to, yeah.
Larry Williams, thank you so much this morning. Of course, he and Ini John McQuire are back right after this program for Business Morning, and then later on the day for Business Incorporated. Let's take a look at some other stories. Doctors working in Ukraine's Donetsk region say they are still under pressure treating debilitating injuries on shifts that in theory are 12 hours long, but which often end up being longer if there are a lot of urgent cases. Andriel, a doctor working in Ukraine's Donetsk region, says he has virtually no time for breaks during his shift at a military hospital near the front lines of the war against Russia. Ambulances shuffle back and forth, carrying soldiers wounded in fighting that's engulfed towns in Ukrainian-held parts of the region. Taking a look at the sports, Ukrainian football legend Andrei Shevchenko was joined by Hollywood actor and vocal supporter of Ukraine Live Shrever as they visited the war ruins of Borodyanka near Kiev. Both have recently become ambassadors of the United 24 charity initiative launched by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. While assessing the war ruins, Shrever, who has Ukrainian roots, said it was important to keep international attention on the war in Ukraine to generate a constant flow of donations. After their visit to Borodyanka, Shevchenko and Shrever were welcomed to the presidential office by Mr. Zelensky to further discuss the newly launched charity initiative. And finally, unified world heavyweight champion, the Ukrainian Alexander Usyk, says Saturday's title defense against Anthony Joshua will be a small or even big party for his people. As Ukraine continues to resist Russia's invasion, Usyk wants to represent his country on a global stage and has promised to give his best performance when he puts his belts on the line. Usyk, who has his own foundation supporting civilians during the war, dethroned Joshua last September to win the WBO, IBF, and WBA heavyweight titles. He walked away from negotiations for a rematch earlier this year to return home when Russia invaded Ukraine. After volunteering with the Territorial Defense Force, he left to specially train for his title defense in Saudi Arabia. And that's where we wrap up the program this morning. Thanks for your company. I'm Ladi Akiridoluali. Do watch out for updates on all our stories at 5 o'clock within the world today. But for now, do have a great day ahead. Good morning.